In 1932, celebrated Broadway actress Peg Entwistle left her home and never came back. Her family was frantic and knew something was very wrong. When the shocking truth finally came out, it exposed the dark side of Hollywood and became one of the most haunting tragedies ever known. We'll get more into that story later on. Peg Entwistle was born Millicent Lillian Entwistle in Wales in 1908. She earned the pet name Peg when she was still young, and apparently liked it enough to carry it with her to the screen and the stage. On the surface, Peg lived an ideal childhood. Her parents were Emily and Robert Entwistle, and Robert was a successful actor who supported the family as best as he could. But her family, as she knew it, was hiding some pretty horrid secrets. While she was still a little girl, Peg's father abruptly ended things with her mother, filing for divorce seemingly out of nowhere. And that's where it got ugly. They fought bitterly for custody over their little girl, with Peg's father somehow winning the case over her mother, even though that was just as rare an outcome then as it is now. Still, her father wasn't content with divorcing her mother and breaking up the family. He had even more up his sleeve than that. He decided to take his family far, far away from their mother. Peg's uncle just so happened to be a stage manager with a ton of contacts in New York City. So when she was still only 4 or 5 years old, Robert Entwistle whisked her away to the United States forever. Thankfully, Peg was a pretty resilient child, and she settled into her new home well. That is, until 1922, when she was just 14 years old. That year, her father Robert was a victim of a vicious hit-and-run accident on Park Avenue, right smack dab in the middle of New York City. The details of the accident were utterly gruesome. According to witnesses, the driver of the car that hit Robert exited the vehicle, took a look at his limp body, and then simply drove away. Robert spent the next month in a coma fighting for his life, but sadly he succumbed to his injuries and left poor Peg an orphan. But there was a silver lining to all this tragedy. In the aftermath of her father's passing, she went to live with her aunt and uncle, Charles and Jane Entwistle, who saw more than precociousness in the little girl. They saw a star in the making. So when Peg insisted that she wanted to follow her father's footsteps as an actor, Charles immediately enrolled her in an acting school. Right away, it was clear that Peg Entwistle was a natural. And while pursuing acting seemed like a great decision at the time, sadly, she would live to regret it. In 1925, when she was just 17 years old, she got a walk-on part in a Broadway production of Hamlet alongside the First Lady of the American Theatre, Ethel Barrymore. It was a humble role, but Peg had her sights set on Barrymore's stardom. Not long after her Broadway debut, Peg scored another role, taking on the part of Hedwig in a 1925 production of The Wild Duck. It was an incredibly fateful performance. During one show, a young Betty Davis happened to be in the crowd, and she told her mother afterwards, "I want to be exactly like Peg Entwistle." At this point, Peg wasn't just making the critics swoon. The beautiful actress also made some of her co-stars go weak in the knees. And it wasn't long before she found love on the stage. In 1927, when she was just 19 years old, Peg married her fellow actor, the dashing Robert Keith. They had a simple ceremony at the New York City clerk's office, but nothing else about their relationship was simple. It's complicated enough to date a coworker, But this man was a walking red flag. The actor was nearly in his 30s when he married Peg, who was, of course, still a teenager. And he set much of the tone of their marriage. It didn't take long for it all to unravel. Less than a year after tying the knot, Peg learned that her husband had been keeping a huge secret from her. One day, he casually told her that he had already been married twice before, once to Alora Jackson, and later to fellow stage actress Helena Shipman. And that wasn't all. He also had a son with his second wife Helena, a boy named Brian. Yep, that makes 2 secret ex-wives and a whole other family. Peg Entwistle's head must have been spinning, but Robert did not stop with his revelations. Little Brian's mother was usually on the road touring with her plays. So guess what? Robert now expected Peg to take over as mummy for the little boy that he had only just told her about. Poor Peg was so shocked and confused that she saw no other option than to give in to his demands and become Brian's stepmother. Now trapped in a horrible situation with basically no escape, at this point it was clear that things were only going to become worse. This nightmare of a marriage dragged on for 2 years, until Peg just couldn't take it anymore. She filed to split from Keith in 1929, citing cruelty when it came to the grounds for divorce. It turns out he was also unfaithful to her and physically violent. When she was finally released from the shackles of that marriage, Peg tried to put herself back into the acting world. At this point, the young star's once bright career was beginning to look quite dim, and soon enough, she resorted to drastic measures. She had perseverance and spunk to spare, but even she started to feel depleted by the hand that fate had dealt her. And with the Great Depression rearing its ugly head in the 1930s, theatre gigs were now even harder to find. And Peg eventually abandoned Broadway to try to seek out her fortune on the West Coast, picking up and moving to LA. While in Tinseltown, she scrapped for work at the margins of Hollywood productions, earning a well-received turn in the play The Mad Hopes, which had an all-too-short month-long run. By June of 1932, she was pretty much back to where she started, out of work and not quite famous enough for offers to be pouring in. Then, out of nowhere, her luck changed. Just 3 days after the Mad Hope's final show, Peg received a fateful phone call. It was the Hollywood production company RKO asking if she would like to come in and do a screen test for them, since they had heard about her work and were intrigued. Finally, it seemed Hollywood was calling her name. How could anything go wrong from here? Peg's screen test went very, very well, and RKO signed her right after her performance, and then they gave her a job almost immediately. They enlisted her in a small role in David O. Selznick's newest production, 13 Women, alongside popular starlets Myrna Loy and Irene Dunne. At last, the big time was here. Although 13 Women was a high-profile flick with big names attached to it, and people called it one of the first female ensemble films, the production was a complete nightmare. For whatever reason, RKO simply could not get test audiences to warm to the film, and they went through several edits to try and whip it into shape. Sadly, Peg Entwistle was the first victim of these cuts. As it happened, one of the test audience's main issues was with Peg's storyline. The consequences were devastating. Where the budding starlet once had a solid supporting role in the original director's cut, editors had whittled her screen time down to a humiliating 4 minutes in the final version. There went Peg's comeback, and there went her big Hollywood break. The studio might as well have signed her death certificate. To make things worse, the skeletons in her father's closet had started to come out. You see, Peg had spent her life estranged from her mother. It was only later in her adolescence that she found out what really happened to her. Initially, her father Robert told the little girl that her mother had tragically passed away, and that's why she could never see her again. Bizarrely enough, nothing could have been further from the truth. In the aftermath of her father's passing, Peg uncovered her father's last will and testament. As she read those pages, her blood likely ran cold. One of the lines read, "I do not desire my said daughter to be at any time in the custody or control of her said mother." In other words, Robert's will revealed a shocking truth: that Peg's mother Emily was still alive. Eventually, she worked up the courage to ask her uncle what had really happened with her mother, and he reluctantly admitted everything. You see, instead of suffering some gruesome fate, Emily Entwistle actually just had an extramarital affair during her marriage to Robert. Apparently, Peg's father felt that he needed to cover up this carnal sin with an enormous whopper. And as you can imagine, that would have been very traumatic to uncover. For Peg, it would have felt like a massive betrayal coming from all sides. So it's no wonder the young star's life turned into a nightmare. In truth, she'd always put an immense amount of pressure on herself to be perfect, and to take on more and more challenging roles. Yet, these roles always took a huge toll on her. As she once said, "To play any kind of emotional scene, I must work up to a certain pitch." Sadly, that emotional pitch soon rose to a screech. Although she never got a true shot at stardom, her obvious talents made her yearn for better roles in her life. She once said, "I would rather play roles that carry conviction. Maybe it's because they are the easiest and yet the hardest things for me to do." Maybe if she hadn't cut her career and life short, she could have seen her name in lights after all. Still, so few people could have predicted the way this tragedy would unfold. One sunny day, Peg awoke like normal in the home that she shared with her aunt and uncle. She scribbled a note on a piece of paper and left it on the table. On the surface, the note seemed completely normal. In it, she assured her aunt and uncle that she was just going out to visit with friends, and to maybe buy some books to add to her collection and read a little later. Sadly, it doesn't seem like she did much reading that evening. Instead, she had a much darker plan in mind for herself. Although we can't quite know everything about Peg Entwistle's last moments, what we can piece together from the evidence is tragic. That night, the actress never returned home to her aunt and uncle's house. In fact, she hadn't been back for 2 days, and her family members were growing frantic about her. Then, on September 18th, a hiker revealed the awful truth. That Sunday, the unidentified hiker made a discovery that would go down in history for all the wrong reasons. While walking near the famed Hollywood land sign, the hiker found a coat, a shoe, and a purse. These were all strange objects to find just lying around that area, but none of them were stranger nor more gruesome than what the hiker found next. As the woman craned her neck down the hill, she saw Peg Entwistle's lifeless body lying 100 feet below the 50-foot-tall letter H of the Hollywood land sign. Apparently, the tragic would-be starlet had hurled herself from the iconic message in a bid to end it all. Stunned, the hiker collected the items that she found strewn about the sign and took them to the LAPD Hollywood station, placing them on the steps and calling in a report. She informed the authorities of the as-yet unidentified body of a young female at the foot of the Hollywood land sign. Of course, we now know who that woman was. When investigators arrived on the scene, it didn't take them too long to figure out what had happened. Still, the details were harrowing. Yes, Peg Entwistle had purposely plummeted to her demise, but the responders also believed she had climbed up a workman's ladder to the top of the H and proceeded to leap headfirst. The autopsy had further tragic findings. Despite the fact that the coroner's autopsy listed Entwistle's injuries in excruciating detail, it also didn't provide much clarity. The examination concluded that the starlet had suffered from fatal internal bleeding and multiple fractures of the pelvis. Moreover, there was no trace of any intoxicating substances in her body. This means that she must have felt everything as she fell. To make matters worse, after her demise, a Los Angeles Herald Examiner editor gave Peg a name that would stick. They called her the Hollywoodland Sign Girl, which just adds to the tragedy of it all, considering that Peg Entwistle could have been famous for so much more. Since her passing, the sign itself was altered from Hollywoodland to read simply Hollywood. But some things still lingered on. Legend has it that Peg's ghost haunts the sign, and visitors to the infamous landmark report hearing cries and screams. And there are a few other signs that Peg still loiters where she once slept. Visitors to the Hollywood sign report more than just hearing voices. They've also reported a particular scent in the air. They claim to have detected the scent of gardenias, which was her favorite perfume. There might really be something there because, eerily enough, gardenias don't grow in the wild in the Hollywood Hills. But what was the truth of it all? And why did things turn out this way? Although she spared her aunt and uncle the reality, the hiker who found Peg's body and belongings opened her purse, and in there she discovered a heartbreaking note. Unlike the message Peg had left her family, this one confessed her desire to die very clearly. She wrote, "I'm afraid. I'm a coward. I'm sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." The actress had then finished the letter with her initials, P.E. Peg's aunt and uncle found out about her violent end in the worst way possible. By September 20th, Peg had been missing for 4 long days. Then her uncle read a newspaper report that sent a chill down his spine. It was about a young woman who had leapt from the Hollywood land sign and left behind a note with the initials P.E. He knew it could only be his Peg. To this day, Peg Entwistle's infamously tragic and jaw-dropping end is synonymous with the cold cruelty of Hollywood dreams. She was a rising star who could have accomplished anything in her lifetime if it hadn't been cut tragically short. Though so much of Peg Entwistle's death still remains a mystery, it's clear that her memory will live on for better or worse. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.